Literally horrified I was last week when I heard this leaked version of the latest peace plan for Ukraine. I don't know what idiots they take us to be, or the Ukrainian people.
Remember that Russia wakes up every morning and attacks them and tries to take more territory and invades villages and attacks them with drones and missiles all over the country. Putin doesn't want to stop the war. He still thinks he can win.
Before, when they started hearing about this peace plan, I hate even using that word, this 28-point surrender document.
Why have we handed our public square in Europe to Chinese companies and to American tech bosses? What have we done? How could we have let this happen?
Mamdani and Trump in the Oval Office was a masterclass. It just
Beautiful.
Scrambled everybody's brains. Nobody could believe it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of The X-Files with me, Christiane Amanpour in London.
And Jamie Rubin in New York State, former official in two State Departments, one under Clinton, one under Biden.
Yes, and I'm a longtime CNNer, reporting in the field, wars, crises, all the rest of it. Now I try to make sense of all this stuff that the leadership of the world is putting before us with my own show, trying to hold leaders accountable. Been doing this for, I don't know, decades. So here's what we're trying to do today. Yet again, trying to figure out which side is up on the Ukraine-Russia situation, because it looks like Trump keeps changing his mind, and we'll get there in a sec. So has he tried to sell out Ukraine? Is he abandoning the relationship with other key U.S. allies over this or not? And are the tech bros taking over U.S. politics, i.e., is it deal makers versus policy makers, and how worried should we all be about it? So, Jamie, let us jump in. So, first and foremost, literally horrified I was last week when I heard this leaked version of the latest so-called peace plan for Ukraine. And as Tom Friedman has said, or at least the headline says, this is a catastrophe and disaster. I genuinely believe that if it does land in the original form that was leaked, which apparently was all Russian dictated, it's a complete Neville Chamberlain's class appeasement and a sellout and a demand for capitulation. On the issue of what Russia wants, again, and we've reported this over and over again, Russia has not changed, but not one iota, its maximalist goals, which it said, as it invaded in 2022, before it invaded in 2022, and ever since it invaded. So they've literally asked for Ukraine to reduce the size of its army, never ever in other words, to change its constitution, and never to say that it wants to have anything to do with NATO, never to allow NATO peacekeepers in if there's any, even if there's a freeze along the current front lines. And what else did it want to do? Oh yeah, not just take the bits that it's staying in right now,
But
but
get
other
more than it
bits
even
that
has.
it doesn't even control. I don't know what idiots they take us to be, or what idiots they take the United States to be, or the Ukrainian people, which has to be said. Some latest poll said something like 69% of them want a negotiated deal. Obviously now they're fed up, but they don't want it on Russian terms. They want it on normal terms. And 24% apparently want to fight to the end and reconquer everything, which is also pretty unrealistic at this point. But things are moving. The Ukrainians and their European allies are pushing back. So where do you think we are today as we record?
Well, I think we're no closer to peace in Ukraine. Look, Donald Trump, as president, thinks he can throw his friend, Mr. Witkoff, into a problem and solve it as if it is a real estate deal. But these are not so simple. And so the proposal, as it emerged, it kind of felt like he was trying to revive what he did with Gaza. It was 20 points. This is 28 points. And he thinks everybody just puts their points down that you can make peace. Well, it's not that simple. And I don't think Witkoff has a team of experts working for him. He tends to take some stuff from the Russians, and now presumably Rubio, having met with Andrei Yermak, the chief of staff to President Zelensky, is going to take some points from the Ukrainians. Meanwhile, the Europeans are standing on the sidelines, horrified. They're horrified for many reasons, but most important because until the Trump administration, the United States used to be on the side of the victims of aggression, used to be on the side of the democratic country of Ukraine, as opposed to Vladimir Putin's Russia. And from all accounts, Donald Trump doesn't seem to distinguish between the two and is perfectly happy to have a peace agreement just so he can say it is a peace agreement.
Yeah.
It's not as if this is costing the United States very much because he stopped providing assistance to Ukraine. It's not costing us money the way it was under President Biden when we were providing billions and billions of dollars of help to the Ukrainians. Now the Europeans have to buy American weapons.
Hmm.
But the bottom line is very simple. Europe, Ukraine are united in rejecting the idea that Russia should gain from its aggression and rejecting the idea that Ukraine should capitulate. The United
Yeah.
States doesn't seem to care under President Trump and just wants a deal, as they say, at any cost, agreement at any cost.
Yeah. So
And I
look,
don't
let's
think it's
just
going to happen.
Yeah, I don't think it is either, but let's just backtrack a little bit because, you brought in Israel, Gaza. I go back to Afghanistan under Trump. That is the template for his so-called deals and his peacemaking. We have nothing to judge anything on other than what he's done in the past. So, just so everybody's clear, he wanted to pull US forces out of Afghanistan. He wanted to, quote, end that war. So what he did in his first administration was negotiate only with the Taliban, not with the legitimately, or whatever you might think of it. It was nonetheless an elected government. Yes, it was corrupt. Yes, it was a little bit feckless. Yes, it wasn't doing as well as perhaps it could be doing, but it was, in fact, the US backed government. There were NATO forces in there, including obviously US forces for years and years and years. Women and girls had made huge progress. Then comes Donald Trump 1.0, and in my how I say it all the time, he ended up giving Afghanistan back to the Taliban. Oops, who hosted the 9/11ers? The Taliban, on a silver platter. And it's the haste to quote unquote end things, quote unquote make peace, that, as you said, makes him side with the winning side and the, aggressor instead of with the victim, or at least with the US ally. So without making judgment calls on the Israel Gaza thing, also he went for the US ally in this case and the very strongest side, and didn't include the Palestinians, which is going to be an issue when we get to actually the nitty gritty of trying to make peace there. And now with the Russians and the Ukrainians, he's constantly undermining the US backed ally, i.e., democratic, sovereign, independent Ukraine, against dictatorial, indicted for war crimes, Putin. So, I mean, am I right in this? Is it just nuts? I mean, this is literally deal making and peace negotiating put on, put turned on his head.
This is a repeat. He's been trying something like this several times from the beginning. The good news for all those of us who care about Ukraine's future is that President Zelensky and the Europeans have at least figured out a way to not make things worse with President Trump. What they do is they go along with the idea of peacemaking. They say they're willing to be flexible and compromise. And I do think Ukraine is willing to compromise. I do think they're willing to make some hard choices if they are what I would call fair and just hard choices. So let me give you an example of that. I think Ukraine would be prepared to freeze in place, despite the fact that Russia is on its territory in much of the Donbass and in Crimea. They would be prepared to stop the war right now. That puts them in a better position. And what may happen, ironically, from all of this is that because this came as a Russian plan and a Russian idea of the whole process, and we could get into the 28 points, but they're not necessary to make the point, that Russia may end up being the one that says no, because I think
Yeah.
Rubio and Europeans and the Ukrainians are going to put back in some basic requirements
Yeah.
that Ukraine is a sovereign country, that Russia can't dictate the size of its military, that Russia can't prevent Ukraine from defending itself. And when they do that, we're going to find out that that's not what Putin has in mind. Putin wants to subjugate Ukraine to make it effectively part of the greater Russia. That is not going to happen. Ukrainians aren't going to stand for it. Europeans are not going to stand for it. As long as this response by the Europeans and Ukraine is diplomatic and smart and careful, then, as some European leaders are already saying, this is a long way from a successful peace talks. But I refer to the Gaza example, and just a final point on this, that wasn't so hard because President Trump had to do what hadn't been done before, put the hammer down on Netanyahu and say, that's it, I've had enough. And we had leverage with Netanyahu. We don't have enough leverage with Putin. President Trump hasn't done the things you need to demonstrate to Putin that with every month that goes by, his situation is going to get worse, not better. And until we have those sanctions and military pressure in place to demonstrate to Putin clearly that things are only going to get worse for him, I don't think he's going to make the necessary compromises, and we're not going to have a peace agreement.
So, a few points. I was talking to a lawyer this weekend who had dealings with shippers. And obviously, they're important in terms of sending Russian oil, to wherever he said they send it, get it refined, bring it back, etc. And there was a feeling amongst these, shipping companies and the like, that actually Russia was doing badly, and within about 6 months, it could really feel the pinch of all this, and the pinch to its economy. So clearly, it wants the sanctions lifted, but it shouldn't. And people were saying, well, why doesn't Trump just wait another 6 months? I guess the thing that I'm so confused about is what is it with Trump, who, you remember back in after the Munich Security Conference, he sent Rubio and at that time National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and others to Saudi Arabia, and they just talked to the Russians. And then he had Zelensky in the White House and completely dissed him. It was just, it's one for the ages. And then he sort of shifted back and forth when he realized that Putin was not playing ball and stringing him along. And as Trump says, he's disappointed with him. What I don't understand is how the president of the United States keeps shifting his views on Russia. Why is this?
Well, first of all, Russian in Trump's mind has been, the big question for many, many years now. What motivates him to be so sympathetic to the Putin position? I don't think it really matters what the motivation is. Let's just deal with the reality. And let me make 2 points about that. One is about the sanctions. So I found it very interesting what you said about the shipping industry believing that the sanctions are starting to pinch in a serious way, and that if we just wait a little bit longer, the pressure will build.
And the
That's the
price of oil,
weird,
apparently.
right. The weird thing about sanctions is, we use them and people get very frustrated and often very angry for sanctioning countries and the effects that it has, but they're a funny tool. They don't work until they work. And then one day the pressure builds and a country changes its position. And you don't exactly know precisely why they did that, but you can speculate reasonably that sanctions had something to do with it. We need two pressure points on Putin. One is the economic pressure of sanctions. And if we keep the pressure on, and in this case, I have to admit, Trump did something good, which was to sanction the two major Russian oil companies. If the shipping sanctions keep working, if the financial sanctions keep working, and the pressure builds around the Kremlin, life is going to get worse, demonstrably worse, and Putin is going to realize there's no out from this without changing his view on the war. The second point of pressure obviously has to be military pressure, and that's where providing the weapons. And remember, Ukraine is doing the fighting and dying. These people are remarkably brave. They've been at it for 3+ years now. They're determined to fight for their own country. When you're fighting for your own land, you have a leg up, even if the other side often has technological advantages. And unfortunately, right now, and I'll bring this to China, and we can talk about that, the Russians apparently have now improved dramatically their drone capability,
Yeah.
the depth with which they can operate drones, and that is precisely because of the help given to them by China.
So do you
China
think
is
Putin, do you think Trump talked to Xi about that?
I don't know, but I hope so. I think that the intelligence, I'm not read in today, but I'm guessing the intelligence will demonstrate that Russian improvements in the drone area are due to Chinese assistance, where they're building drones and giving them to the Russians in joint production facilities inside Russia and things like that, that have made Russian drone capability improved. The only thing the Chinese have ever done of any value is to one day early on say they would prefer that Russia not use nuclear weapons. Besides that, I think we have to be honest with ourselves. China is all in for Russia. They want Russia to win. And this is the problem, to get to your basic question. Trump really thinks that the world is run by three people: him, Putin, and Xi Jinping, and that all he needs to really do is talk to those three, and these power
Hmm.
entities controlling their, quote, sphere of influence can dictate terms to everyone else. And what he's finding out is the world isn't that simple.
Yeah,
It's not a game of risk. You don't just get to talk to the Russians and the Chinese. The Ukrainians have a say in this matter. The
and the
Europeans have a say
Europeans,
in this
yeah.
matter. And so that's why these things don't work. But he keeps coming back to it because, let's face it, he's not in a good position politically right now. And he's looking to pull a rabbit out of the hat, like he often does in his business career, and it's just not going to happen.
So, Jamie, this is you just hit on something that I think is really, really significant, because every time this kind of pro-Putin, pro-Russian documentation or, you know, leaning from the Trump administration comes out, you see now the Europeans and Zelensky leap into the breach very fast. So this all caught the Europeans and the rest of the G20 by surprise when they were all huddled over the weekend in South Africa. The US boycotted it. Trump didn't go, nor did he send any seniors. And they all said, politely, yeah, we support President Trump and his peacemaking efforts, but we need it to be, respecting Ukraine's position and not just a capitulation to Russia. I'm not sure they used that word, but that's what they meant. And they came up with ways to bolster Ukraine and how to redefine this. Then Secretary of State Marco Rubio goes to Geneva, meets with Zelensky and his seniors, and then comes out and says, well, this is not an ultimatum. It's a living document, and we want to make it a viable situation. I think the thing that's troubling is that Steve Witkoff hosted Kirill Dmitriev, who is the Russian interlocutor. I mean, he was first meant to be the business guy. Now he's become the Witkoff for Putin, and they spent, I don't know how long, but apparently a couple of weeks in Witkoff's personal home in Miami, hammering this out. And somebody has
They
leaked
didn't
it.
hammer much out. All they
No,
did is
somebody's
staple
leaked it,
together
Jamie,
the
the whole Russian version. I mean, it looked
Yeah, they
like it was
stapled together the
Russian.
Russian version.
Yeah.
And, this is Witkoff's problem. He thinks he's dealing with real estate deals where you get one guy's offer, and then you get the other guy's offer, and you sort of try to split it down the middle.
Mhm.
This isn't a real estate deal. This isn't buying a house or a building or an apartment complex. This is a complex, the most complex war in our time, something that will have multiple elements. I mean, let's be honest, what you need for a peace agreement. You need to figure out whether there's going to be a force and a stand down in place. You need to figure out the sovereignty of the territory that Russia controls. You need to figure out what to do about sanctions. You need to figure out what to do about security for the Ukrainians going forward. You have to figure out what to do about all the hundreds of billions of dollars of Russian money that's been frozen, that needs to compensate the Ukrainians for their suffering. You need to have prisoners of war exchange. You need to have the children returned. I'm getting my point being, this is 100-page document just for the basics. And they think they can staple together a couple of pages and make peace.
28 points. Russia even said no accountability for any of the war crimes that have been charged. I mean, Bucha, all of those places. Um, just whitewash it all, just poof, and all the war
But
crimes have gone.
let's address the hard questions. So the hardest question of all is what you can reasonably expect Zelensky and Ukraine to accept.
Yeah.
Obviously, they want all of Crimea, they want all of
Can I just
Donbass,
just
they
I
want
just want
all
to say
their
one thing,
territory
Jamie.
back.
One thing while you say
Yeah.
that, the list. The bottom line, and I was just talking to some officials about what we discussed last week, which is Friday was the anniversary of the end of the Bosnia War. The sine qua non for any ceasefire, any peace, is a ceasefire. There's not even a ceasefire. It's not even being discussed between Russia and Ukraine. Not even the basics.
Well, right. And so I think this is where Ukraine has been very smart. Because remember, originally, Trump wanted a ceasefire, and Ukraine said no. Because they want to get their territory back. And then they figured out quite wisely that, of course, they can say yes and then show that it's Russia that keeps attacking them. Remember that Russia wakes up every morning and attacks them and tries to take more territory and invades villages and attacks them with drones and missiles all over the country. And so that first point, as you say, is the basics. Does the other side really want to stop the war? And what Trump is finally maybe sort of figuring out, and certainly Rubio knows, and the smart people in the government know, that Putin doesn't want to stop the war. He still thinks he can win.
Right.
And until he
Trump knows
realizes
that, by the way. He also thinks that in his conversations, Putin has indicated that he thinks he can win.
Right, and until that changes, and that's the fundamental point here. We can talk if we want about what Ukraine could accept or not accept, but none of that is going to matter until Putin, one man, one horrible, horrible man sitting in the Kremlin, changes his mind. And until that mind is changed by virtue of correlation of forces, as the Soviet Union used to say, military, economic,
Mhm.
political, until those correlation of forces change, Russia realizing that it's going to get worse for them, not better, financially,
Yeah.
economically, and militarily, Putin is not going to change his mind, and there's not going to be a peace agreement. So my sort of bottom line here is that Ukraine and the Europeans now realize that they've put a pretty good plan together, which is to continue to fight using European purchased American weapons and European weapons. Remember, the French are now giving them advanced fighter planes. Ukraine is going to show that it's going to fight. And until Putin realizes that that isn't going to change and his situation is going to be worse, we can talk up till we're blue in the face, but the realities won't change.
Yes. On the other hand, there's significant pain. Obviously, we know that hundreds of thousands, up to a million or more, have been killed or wounded on the Russian side since 2022. But on the Ukrainian side, we've got a morale problem on the lines there. You've got Russia, really actually digging in now, potentially going to get Pokrovs. A lot of it has been made of Pokrovs. I'm not sure that it is as massively strategically important as everybody was saying before. But nonetheless, they're homing in on that, very important in the Donbass areas. There's quite a lot of AWOL right now, hundreds of thousands, maybe double what there were last year. And it's very hard for them. They are outmanned. They just are. And then, of course, they're wrapped up in this ridiculous, unacceptable corruption scandal as well, which Putin thinks makes Zelensky weaker, although he's not been accused of it, but people close to him have. I mean, it's
Well, look,
just
I think you're right about all of those points. Is the way Ukraine is suffering, and the people, are worried about why they're fighting when other people aren't fighting. Are people getting out? Are people getting AWOL? Are people paying their way through it? This is what happens in a war. And Russia is bigger than Ukraine, and their soldiers can be forced conscription. But I'm told that one thing that is a sort of a basic rule for Putin is to make sure conscripts aren't doing the fighting, that they're doing the defending. But he's got enough others that he's paying that came from North Korea at some points, probably other mercenaries that are doing the fighting. And most of the fighting, frankly, is being done by these drones right now. And the drones are being made by Chinese companies and Chinese designs and Chinese engineering. And I think the world would do well to start to raise the pressure on Xi
yeah.
Jinping, because remember, all these things have to change. Chinese support, the pain of sanctions, the
Mhm.
pressure on the battlefield. Until those change negatively for Putin, the war is going to go on.
Yeah, I mean, a point on that, clearly, as Trump has tried to pressure Xi on trade, it's Trump who's been outplayed. So I don't know how you get a proper pressure on China, and that's very, very worrying. Last Friday, before when they started hearing about this peace plan, I hate even using that word, this 28-point surrender document. Um, Zelensky went on, national TV, and he basically said, we face a really existential choice between a key partner or our dignity. And it's really tragic that, and again, I'm going to go back to Bosnia. Everybody hoped, wished that Sarajevo would stop being such a problem and just capitulate. Well, it didn't. It didn't, and it kept fighting. It was massively outgunned, massively outmanned by the Serbs, and it didn't. And eventually, there was an end to the war, as you say, along the front lines, the contact lines. But I also do want to say, because we're going to move now into our second segment, which was, are the tech bros taking over U.S. politics? Is it all about deal making rather than policy making? And I just want to say, and we're not going to argue about this, Jamie, but Mamdani and Trump in the Oval Office was a master class. It just
Beautiful.
scrambled everybody's brains. Nobody could believe it. All the so-called experts and the pundits and White House correspondents, whatever it is, it was a master class in outfoxing the expectations. And Trump, in my opinion, also understands maybe the affordability crisis, but also more importantly,
I think he just loves New York. He's a New
I
Yorker.
think he loves the winner, and he wants to be liked by the
True, too.
new cool kid in the class.
I agree with all of
Yeah.
that. Let's just
All
hope it
right.
all works out.
I hope it all works out too. In any event, we're gonna take a quick break, and when we come back, the other part of our conversation. Okay, so we're back from War and Peace to dollars and cents. What is it about You like
Good
that,
one.
Jamie, right? Not bad. I made it up on the fly, on the fly. I should have been a headline writer.
That was a
So,
good one.
after that, another debacle from my perspective, because it was all about a journalist, one who'd been murdered and dismembered, another who was being berated by the president for daring to ask that question in the Oval Office last week, two, $1 trillion promise by the Saudi Crown Prince MBS to invest in the United States. And all the tech bros being at this, not a state dinner, but quasi state dinner, uh, it's very, very, very mercantile and mercenary, right? This whole policy making. It is all about money.
Yes, and dollars and cents from War and Peace was a very good line, Christiane. Let me just say, money, unfortunately, has always played too big a role in American politics, but now it's exploded and to a degree that's truly intolerable. The idea that these fabulously wealthy tech bosses, I like to call them, because they're the bosses, and everyone else has to live with their decision making. It's not just about them getting better deals and making more money, which is all they care about. It's because these two fields in which they are so powerful, the social media world and the artificial intelligence world. These are the two fields that can change our world for the better or for the worse. And I believe that the danger here is not that they're going to make more money. Fine. Rich people make more money. Oil barons made more money, et cetera. It's whether they're going to be regulated.
Mm,
Are they going to be controlled? Is the pollution that they put into our world going to be ameliorated? Are they going to come up with a filter for this pollution?
mhm.
So those are analogies,
Do you
but I
mean
think
real
that's
pollution or corruption pollution?
I mean pollution of our social media
Right.
landscape. It's a pollution to have disinformation, to have lies. And
Yeah.
when Zuckerberg announced that he was going to remove his fact checking part of Meta upon Trump's victory, you knew that these people have no social conscience. They don't care about our world. And as I mentioned in a previous episode, worth quoting again, President Macron of France has realized and said in a very powerful speech, why have we handed our public square in Europe to Chinese uh, companies and to American tech bosses? What have we done? How could we have let this happen? So I am hoping that some people in our world, ideally Europeans who have the power and the regulatory capability to act, are going to slowly but steadily prevent these tech bosses from ruining our world, either through AI that's uncontrolled or through social media that destroys a fact based world that is necessary for democracy to succeed. And there's going to be a filter in the form of regulation on these tech bosses. It's not going to happen under President Trump. He loves these guys, he loves hanging out with the richest people. That's who he respects for whatever reason. He loves money. And that's what he respects. But what we need is slowly but steadily is the democratic world to develop the filters for the pollution these AI bosses and these social media bosses are imposing on our world. And unless we do that, our world is going to deteriorate and our way of life is going to be destroyed.
Mhm. Just to recap, of course, we said that all these tech bosses were in the front row in front of Congress and the others at the inauguration. We know that many of them and other corporate leaders are paying huge sums to quote unquote, is it renovate or build? Oh, yeah, no, it's build because Trump knock down the East Wing, build the ballroom, and of course they populated the dinner for Crown Prince MBS of Saudi Arabia. The thing that kind of sums Trump up to me in regard to, the money and all the rest of it. Did you see when he was saying he kind of had his hand on MBS's, I don't know what, his knee, his arm, whatever it was, and he said, "And we've got a $600 billion pledge. Come on, I think we can get it to a trillion." Right? As if he was a Christie's auctioneer, I swear to God. And the next day, MBS went, "Yes, okay, all right, all right. It's a $1 trillion." But
Because remember, these numbers are meaningless. Nobody ever holds
I
them
know,
to
but
it. There's
it's
no specificity. It's just a way of Trump acting like he improved the American economy by getting
mm,
these Saudis to invest in ways they were going to invest in anyway.
yeah, yeah. I was at a summit here of African business people, business leaders, and some political leaders, and they basically said to me, the we're now moving on to tariffs. So tariffs, um, we're about anything but trade. It's just about leverage. Tariffs are leverage for anything Trump wants. How about this? I'm just reading this that somebody just sent me under the heading of luxury diplomacy. Let's be blunt. Handing a Rolex and a gold bar to a US billionaire in exchange for lower import duties is about as low as modern diplomacy gets. And yet, it worked. US tariffs on Swiss goods have now dropped from 39% to 15%, and everyone is pretending it's a resounding victory.
Look, what can one say about this? The Constitution was created specifically to prevent kings and royals from making decisions based on, some whether they liked somebody or whether that someone gave them money. And now our Constitution has been so manipulated by President Trump that they think they can decide for themselves when tariffs are put on or not put on, lowered or raised. And I hope and pray that the Supreme Court is going to put a stop to this. At some point soon, there's going to be a decision by the court on whether Trump has the unilateral power to impose or reduce or increase tariffs without Congress making those decisions, despite the fact that the Constitution is clear that this power of economic commerce with foreign nations is in the hands of the Congress. If this Supreme Court doesn't give that decision a clear, resounding victory for the plaintiffs in this case, namely that Trump doesn't have this power, I'm going to seriously worry about the rule of law in the United States. I'm already worried. No question, but in many cases, the judges have been the guardrails of our democracy. This is the big one. Does Trump have the power to make deals around the world based on whim or whatever the hell he wants, based on money, bribery, whatever you call it, watches, Bitcoin, whatever the stuff is? This is not the way our system is supposed to work.
Okay, we're going to take a break and we will come back with our recommendations. Okay, we're back with the last part of our conversation. This is where we give you our recommendations. You might toss them in the bin, you might take them up, who knows, but nonetheless, this is what we do. So, Jamie, you are going to go first.
All right. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit, but I think you'll get a kick
No!
out of it. I'm going to cheat by saying that I have to recommend this is Scorsese. After you
Excuse
recommended it,
me.
I watched it, 5 parts. I watched them all, and it was extraordinary.
Yes.
All the movies that he's made, the stories of how he grew up as an asthmatic kid in Little Italy
It's
near where I
amazing.
live now, the corner of Elizabeth Street in Kenmare. I walk by it every day. I can't believe this is where Scorsese came from. And then all the movies. And what's great
Yeah.
about the story is how he fought Hollywood and he
Mhm.
struggled with Hollywood, who was only interested in making money. And he had his ups and his downs and his ups and his downs. And he went through personal trials and
Yeah.
tribulations. And then he succeeded. And then he took him decades to win the Oscar and he finally got it. All of those things made it very powerful. But just to show that I'm not completely cheating, if I needed to do one that hasn't been done before, I'm going to put in my all time favorite audiobook. And it's called The Complete Essays of Montaigne. Montaigne was a brilliant Frenchman who wrote about life, and he wrote about stoic life and cynical life and the life of man's mind. And it's a beautiful, beautiful set of essays about everything, about man and animals, about ego and ego death, and all of the brilliant things that philosophers have thought about. So that's my recommendation for an audiobook. But I have to admit, you are spot on Scorsese.
I know, it's phenomenal. And what I love, of course, is relationships. So I just adored, and the backstory, but what he did with De Niro over all those films and the progression. And then, with Leonardo DiCaprio, at the time, the new it actor of the time, and how DiCaprio grew into such a phenomenal actor with this brilliant mentor and director, Martin Scorsese. So I just think it was just phenomenal on all fronts. So I am going to recommend a documentary that I watched this week, and it is called Coexistence My Ass, or in England, My Arse for our English listeners. And it is by this incredible Israeli, Noam Schuster Eliassi. She happens to be part Iranian Jewish, I identify, though I'm not Jewish, I'm Iranian Catholic, and part Romanian Jewish. But the most important thing about her experience, in my view, is that her parents were very much in the peacenik camp, and they took they took their family to this very rare village in Israel called Oasis of Peace, Neve Shalom, I think it is in Hebrew. But what happened is that she grew up in the ideal situation, which proved to her and her family and friends that you can actually live and coexist with your Arab neighbors. She learned Arabic. Her best friend is Palestinian, and she's a comedian. And she had gone to Harvard to do a presentation on all of this through comedy, and she's done comedy all over the world. And now, of course, all of this is in question and knocked her for a loop a little bit since October 7th, because it's much more difficult getting booked if you're of that political ilk. It's much more difficult trying to persuade the bulk of either side that coexistence still matters and still is possible, hence coexistence my arse. But it is so touching. It is so incredibly brilliant. It's just fantastic. I highly, highly recommend it. I interviewed her on my CNN program, and she didn't disappoint. She really delivered, and she's wonderful. So where people can see it is a little limited right now, because it had a limited theatrical release in the US, which unfortunately just finished. But for a list of upcoming screenings and festivals, check the website, Coexistence My Arse. I'm just going to put it there.
It's hard to forget
Isn't
that.
that good? And it will eventually be streamed, but at the moment it's screenings and festivals. But I highly recommend it, because honestly, it's a feel good, and it's not a La La Land feel good. It's a real possibility, and we know that happened before all this happened. So I still hold out hope.
Me too.
Um,
Me
yeah,
too.
good. Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you for listening. Make sure you are following all our feeds. Or our feed, however many feeds there are, just follow it so that you never miss an episode. Remember, you can also watch every episode on YouTube. Just search Christiane Amanpour Presents The X-Files. That's on our YouTube channel, and subscribe there. You can listen for free on Global Player. Download it from the App Store or go to globalplayer.com. And don't forget that on Thursday, we will drop our bonus Q&A segment. So keep your questions coming. And again, email us at amanpourpod@global.com, or find us on social media at amanpourpod. Okay, that's it.
Goodbye from New York.
Goodbye from London across the pond.